The summer of 1914 was a storm waiting to break. Europe stood on the edge of a war unlike any before. Alliances were tested, monarchs gave orders, and armies prepared for battle. Yet there was one empire caught between choices: the Ottoman Empire. A realm of deserts, mountains, and crossroads of civilizations, it stood weary from defeats, uncertain of where to turn. Some ministers urged friendship with Britain. Others whispered promises from Berlin, while the people themselves, exhausted from years of Balkan wars and losses, simply longed for peace. Now imagine a different turn. Imagine if the Ottomans never entered the Great War, not as allies of Germany, not as enemies of Britain, but as true neutrals, protecting their borders, building their strength, and waiting for Europe to destroy itself. In this alternate history, neutrality would become their greatest weapon. It would reshape not just the Middle East, but the entire world. At the dawn of the 20th century, the empire was no longer the terror of Vienna or the conqueror of vast lands. Instead, it was the sick man of Europe, mocked by diplomats, preyed upon by neighbors, and rotting from within. Corruption weakened its institutions, diversity became division, and the shadow of collapse seemed inevitable. And yet, the Ottomans still controlled crucial lands: the Straits of the Dardanelles, the city of Constantinople, the pilgrimage routes of Mecca and Medina, and, most importantly, untapped oil in Mesopotamia. Whoever held these keys could change the fate of nations. Historically, a single decision drove the Ottomans into the fire. Enver Pasha and his allies threw their lot with Germany, convinced that only by siding with the Central Powers could the empire survive. But in our alternate story, fate bends in another direction. The Committee of Union and Progress loses its grip sooner. A coalition of liberals and cautious generals takes charge. Their priority is survival, not glory. They see war as poison, not salvation. So when the July crisis erupts after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the Ottomans stand back. They mourn, they issue statements, but they do not mobilize. German envoys arrive with promises of restored territory. British diplomats hesitate with offers of support, but the Ottoman parliament refuses to be swayed. The empire declares strict neutrality: no passage of foreign warships through the straits, no military alliance with either side. This neutrality shocks Europe. Germany had hoped to use Ottoman territory as a shield against Russia. Britain had feared for the safety of the Suez Canal. But both powers quickly realize that the empire will not move. In Constantinople, newspapers declare a new era, an age where survival means patience, not conquest. Now the stage is set for great changes. Without Ottoman intervention, the Caucasus front never opens. Russian troops, once locked in bitter battles in Anatolia, are freed to fight elsewhere. Supplies flow more easily through neutral Turkish waters, and the grinding cost of war begins to tilt. But neutrality also transforms the Ottoman Empire itself. Instead of bleeding its youth on distant battlefields, the empire invests in railways, schools, and rebuilding shattered provinces. Refugees from the Balkans are resettled, farmers return to their fields, and trade routes remain open to both sides. The empire becomes a silent merchant, selling food, raw materials, and oil to anyone willing to pay. Still, neutrality is not peace. Tensions simmer inside. Arabs in the deserts seek greater autonomy. Armenians demand reforms, and conservative clerics clash with modernizers in parliament. Yet without the distraction of a world war, the government has more tools to manage these challenges. Autonomy is granted to provinces. Schools teach in multiple languages, and for a brief time, the empire experiences something rare: stability. Meanwhile, in Europe, the war rages fiercer. Austria-Hungary crumbles faster without a southern partner. Serbia resists longer. Russia presses harder against Germany, and Britain does not waste soldiers in Gallipoli or Mesopotamia. Instead, their divisions reinforce France. By 1916, the stalemate of trenches begins to shift, and the Central Powers find themselves squeezed on every side. For the Ottomans, this is a time of watching and waiting. German officers plead for support. British envoys warn of consequences, but the empire plays a careful game. Neutrality allows them to hold on, to avoid the destruction that later swept away empires like Austria-Hungary and Russia. And when the war finally ends, the map of Europe is redrawn, but the Ottoman Empire still stands. Not victorious, not defeated, simply alive. Its lands intact, its cities untouched, its armies unbroken. While Vienna falls, while Berlin surrenders, Constantinople remains. This survival alone is a revolution because it changes everything that follows. The mandates of Britain and France over the Middle East never take shape in the same way. There is no Sykes-Picot carved into the deserts, no partition of Anatolia, and no war of independence led by a young general named Mustafa Kemal. Instead, the empire limps forward, weakened but sovereign, and with oil beginning to flow, it finds itself holding the resource every nation desires. But neutrality comes with its own challenges. The empire must balance between powers hungry for influence. Britain wants secure passage to India. France eyes Syria. Germany still dreams of Berlin to Baghdad railways. And Russia, whether Tsarist or revolutionary, craves access to warm water ports. The Ottomans walk a tightrope. One slip could drag them into ruin. But for now, in this alternate history, they remain standing. While others collapse, the sick man of Europe has not died. He has merely endured. And the question arises, what happens next? In a world where the Ottoman Empire survives the Great War, when oil, nationalism, and ideology begin to reshape the 20th century, this is where the story truly begins.
The year is 1919, and the guns of Europe have finally fallen silent. Nations lie in ruins, soldiers return scarred, monarchies crumble, and new flags rise over old palaces. Yet the Ottoman Empire still breathes, not triumphant, but not broken. Its survival shocks the world. Diplomats whisper that the sick man has cheated death once more. In Paris, the victors gather to carve the world into zones of influence. Britain claims colonies from Africa to the Middle East. France takes Syria and Lebanon. Japan and Italy demand their spoils, yet the Ottomans cannot be treated like a corpse. They were not defeated. They signed no armistice. Their troops never surrendered. Constantinople still rules from the Bosporus, so the great powers face an uneasy truth. The empire remains. For Britain, this is a dilemma. The empire of India depends on the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal depends on Ottoman goodwill. Occupying Egypt is one thing, but facing an unfriendly Ottoman state across the desert is another. So London chooses diplomacy. They offer investment, advisors, and recognition of Ottoman sovereignty in exchange for safe passage and stable frontiers. France is less patient. In their eyes, Syria and Lebanon belong within their sphere, but the Ottomans refuse to yield. They argue that these provinces are tied by history, by language, by the pilgrimage routes that bind Damascus and Baghdad to Mecca. French officials fume, but war weariness ties their hands. For now, they must accept the Ottoman presence. Germany lies broken, its Kaiser exiled, its empire dismantled. Yet even here the Ottomans see opportunity. German engineers and traders return, eager to build railways and factories. Berlin dreams of restoring influence through commerce, not conquest. And the Berlin to Baghdad railway becomes a symbol once more, this time not of empire, but of survival. Inside the Ottoman Empire, neutrality has preserved strength, yet wounds still ache. Millions of refugees crowd Anatolia after the Balkan Wars. Armenians push for reforms. Arabs dream of autonomy. Kurds demand recognition. The empire is a patchwork quilt, fragile and fraying, but still stitched together. In parliament, debates rage. Liberals argue for decentralization. Conservatives demand central authority. And the army watches carefully, determined to hold the state together by force if words fail. What makes this era unique is oil. Black rivers beneath Mesopotamia begin to flow. British and French companies beg for concessions. American businessmen arrive with contracts. But the Ottomans are cautious. They remember the lesson of lost lands. So they strike deals that allow investment, but keep ultimate control in Constantinople. Revenue grows. Railways expand. Ports are modernized. For the first time in decades, the empire feels the spark of renewal. Yet danger is never far. Nationalism spreads across the provinces like fire through dry grass. In Damascus, Arab intellectuals call for a parliament of their own. In Cairo, students publish pamphlets demanding independence from foreign tutelage. In Armenia, exiles whisper of self-rule. The empire cannot crush all these voices without risking rebellion, so it tries compromise. Autonomy is granted in small steps. Governors are appointed from local elites, and the empire begins to look less like an iron fist and more like a federation. Across the Black Sea, Russia trembles. The Tsar is gone. Revolution has swept the land. Civil war rages between Reds and Whites, and the Ottomans watch with wary eyes. Historically, they would have fought in the Caucasus, but in this new world, they choose another path. When white armies retreat into the mountains of Georgia, Ottoman troops block the passes, not to fight, but to maintain order. When red soldiers advance, the Ottomans negotiate, insisting that the Caucasus remain under their influence. This neutrality, once mocked, now gives the empire leverage. Britain and France want a stable Middle East. Germany seeks partners in recovery. And even Russia, bleeding from civil war, cannot afford to provoke the empire. For the first time in a century, the Ottomans are not merely the sick man, they are a necessary man, a mediator, a merchant, a survivor. But survival is not the same as strength. Beneath the surface, unrest brews. Peasants resent taxes, minorities demand rights, soldiers grumble about pay, and the memory of lost provinces still burns. Constantinople is a city of intrigue. Ministers plot against each other, generals whisper of coups, and foreign ambassadors pour gold into every faction, waiting for the empire to stumble. As the 1920s dawn, a new generation rises. They are not shaped by conquest like their grandfathers, nor by humiliation like their fathers. They are shaped by survival. Young officers trained in German academies, students educated in Paris and London, merchants trading with New York. They see the empire not as a decaying relic, but as a nation that can modernize if only it dares. Yet here lies the greatest divergence of all. In our real history, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk rose from the ashes of war to forge a new Turkey, abolishing the caliphate, embracing secularism, and pushing Western reforms. But in this alternate story, his chance never comes. There is no War of Independence, no Lausanne Treaty, no republic. He remains a respected general, perhaps a reformist voice, but not the founder of a nation. Without him, the caliphate endures, the fez remains, the Arabic script still dominates. Women wait longer for equal rights, and the empire modernizes not through revolution, but through cautious steps. This slow modernization creates a paradox. On one hand, the empire remains rooted in tradition.
Clerics still wield power. Provinces still cling to old customs. But on the other hand, the lure of oil, trade, and technology pushes forward. Cities like Baghdad and Aleppo become modern hubs. Railways link Anatolia to the Gulf, and foreign investors bring electricity and factories. The empire becomes a land of contrasts, ancient mosques standing beside new power stations, camels crossing roads alongside automobiles. By the mid-1920s, the world has shifted. America rises as an economic giant. Europe struggles with recovery, and the Ottoman Empire sits quietly, holding its cards. It has survived the storm of war. It has tasted oil wealth, and it has avoided the fate of dismemberment. But storms still gather. The Italian fascists dream of empire. Germany grows restless under humiliation. Russia, under the Reds, prepares to spread ideology. And Britain and France continue to tighten their grip on colonies. The Ottomans must now decide. Do they remain passive observers, merchants trading with all sides, or do they prepare to play a greater role? The empire stands at a crossroads once again. Neutrality saved it once, but will neutrality save it again when the world marches toward another war?
The year is 1929, and the world trembles as markets collapse, banks close their doors, and fortunes vanish overnight. The Great Depression spreads across continents like a plague. Factories in America shut down. Workers in Britain march in hunger. Germany sinks deeper into despair. Yet the Ottoman Empire faces this storm with a strange mixture of weakness and resilience. Unlike industrial Europe, the empire is not built upon vast factories and exports. Its wealth comes from land, from agriculture, and now from oil. So while cities feel the chill of the global crisis, the countryside still produces food, caravans still move across deserts, and tankers still carry oil to hungry markets. Revenues fall, unrest rises, but collapse is avoided. This oil is the empire's lifeline. British companies press harder for greater control. French bankers offer loans. Americans arrive with promises of pipelines and refineries. The Ottoman government plays them against one another, offering concessions but never surrendering full ownership. Foreign capital modernizes ports and railways, but the sultans and ministers keep the golden tap under their authority. This policy frustrates investors, yet it keeps the empire from becoming another colony. Meanwhile, ideology spreads like wildfire across borders. In Italy, Mussolini proclaims a new Roman Empire. His legions march into Africa. His banners wave over the Mediterranean. In Germany, a fiery orator rises, promising to restore pride and avenge humiliation. In Russia, the Soviets consolidate power, their red banners carried by workers and soldiers alike. Everywhere old monarchies are falling. Everywhere new forces gather, and the Ottomans cannot remain untouched. Inside the empire, tensions grow. Arabs in Mesopotamia demand full independence. Armenians call for autonomy. Kurds resist assimilation, and young Turks in the capital whisper of republican ideals. The caliphate still holds prestige. The sultan still commands loyalty, but cracks spread wider. The parliament debates reforms. Some call for more federal structure. Others demand strict central rule. The army remains the ultimate referee, waiting to strike if order collapses. In this fragile balance emerges a new figure, not a revolutionary like Ataturk, but a coalition of officers and ministers who see survival through cautious modernization. They push education, expand literacy, encourage industry, and introduce Western legal codes alongside Islamic tradition. Reforms are slow, uneven, and contested, but they prevent outright stagnation. The empire changes, not as a leap, but as a crawl. By the mid-1930s, the empire stands in an uneasy position. Its lands stretch from the Balkans to Arabia. Its oil fields feed foreign machines. Its armies patrol restless provinces. Yet it is neither fully modern nor fully medieval. It is a survivor, scarred but stubborn.
Then comes the rise of fascism and the looming shadow of another war. Germany rearms, Italy threatens the eastern Mediterranean, Japan seizes Asia, and Britain and France scramble to defend their global empires. Once more, the Ottoman Empire becomes the crossroads. Everyone seeks its loyalty, everyone fears its potential. Berlin sends envoys promising restoration of lost provinces. Rome offers alliance against common rivals. Moscow warns of capitalist plots. London and Paris press for continued neutrality. The Ottomans hesitate. The memory of neutrality in the Great War is still strong. It saved the empire once. Could it save them again? But neutrality now is harder. The world is more polarized. Ideologies demand loyalty. Fascism, communism, liberal democracy all clash for dominance. The empire cannot forever play merchant between them. Eventually, a choice will come. In the streets of Constantinople, students march waving flags of reform. Some cry for socialism, others for nationalism. Clerics warn of foreign corruption. Merchants demand stability, and soldiers drill in anticipation. The empire is restless, its heart still beats, but it beats faster with each passing year. By 1936, a critical event unfolds. Italy invades Ethiopia, and the League of Nations proves powerless. In Cairo and Damascus, crowds riot against European imperialism, and in Constantinople, voices in parliament ask why the empire should stand aside while neighbors fall. This marks a subtle shift. Neutrality is no longer unquestioned. Whispers grow louder that the Ottomans must prepare for war, not for conquest, but for survival in a world spiraling into conflict. At the same time, Germany courts the empire more aggressively. German companies invest in railways, German officers train Ottoman cadets, propaganda floods the press, promising friendship and mutual destiny. Britain counters with trade deals and naval advisors. France offers cultural ties and recognition of autonomy for Arab provinces. Every power bids for Ottoman favor. Every ambassador knows that control of the straits and the oil fields could change the balance of the next war. Within the empire, debates rage. Should they align with Britain to protect the Suez and avoid colonial encirclement? Should they side with Germany, whose promises of strength echo past memories? Or should they cling to neutrality once again and hope the storm passes? The Sultan remains cautious, the parliament divided, the army restless, and the people anxious. The year is 1939. War erupts in Europe once more. Germany invades Poland. Britain and France declare war, and the world plunges into chaos. The Ottoman Empire declares neutrality once again. But neutrality now is fragile. Both sides watch Constantinople closely. Both sides seek passage, resources, and allies. The empire stands on the edge. One wrong move could ignite its lands. For the first year, they succeed. Trade continues, diplomats shuttle between embassies, armies drill but do not march. Yet whispers grow that neutrality cannot last. Germany offers Cyprus, Syria, and influence in Central Asia if the Ottomans join them. Britain offers security guarantees, weapons, and loans if they stand with the Allies. The Ottomans hesitate, weighing promises against risks. By 1940, the pressure mounts. Germany victories sweep across Europe, France collapses, and Britain stands alone. And the Ottoman government fears the Axis will dominate. In secret councils, ministers debate. Some argue for alliance with Germany. Others warn of British wrath. The Sultan listens but says little, waiting for events to decide. And here the great question arises. Can the empire walk the tightrope once more, or must it finally step into the fire? The decision will shape not only their future, but the fate of the war itself. The stage is set for the most dangerous gamble of all. The Second World War awaits the Ottoman Empire.
The year is 1941, and the world is aflame. German tanks thunder across Europe. Britain fights alone in the skies. The Soviet Union waits in uneasy tension, and far away, Japan prepares its own strike. In the middle of it all stands the Ottoman Empire, a survivor of the last war, a keeper of the straits, a guardian of oil, a prize both sides desperately covet. For months, the empire clings to neutrality. The Sultan speaks of peace. The parliament votes for non-alignment. But the pressure is relentless. German envoys promise glory, the return of lost provinces, even influence in Central Asia. British ministers promise protection, modern weapons, and guaranteed borders. Both sides understand the stakes. Whoever wins, the empire wins a bridge between continents, a gate to oil and to seas. Then Operation Barbarossa begins. Germany invades the Soviet Union. The Eastern Front explodes in fire. Suddenly, the Ottoman position changes overnight. The Axis urged them to strike north into the Caucasus, to cut off the Soviets from vital oil fields. Britain warns that joining Germany would bring devastation. The empire hesitates, but knows neutrality grows weaker by the hour. Inside Constantinople, debates rage. Generals argue that siding with Germany could restore Ottoman glory. Liberals fear the wrath of Britain. Conservatives insist that neutrality is still possible. But younger officers whisper of destiny, that the empire must choose action over hesitation. The oil fields of Mesopotamia, the passes of Anatolia, the ports of the Levant, all stand waiting to be claimed or defended. By late 1941, a decision is made. Under pressure from nationalist ministers and ambitious generals, the empire edges toward the Axis, not fully, not openly at first, but through secret shipments of oil, through closed-door agreements, through quiet cooperation. Soon, the alliance is no longer secret. The empire declares war against Britain and the Soviet Union, joining Germany and Italy in a desperate gamble. The consequences are immediate. Axis banners fly beside Ottoman crescents. German divisions march into Anatolia. Ottoman troops push into the Caucasus. The British scramble to defend Egypt and the Suez Canal. Uprisings ignite in Iraq, India, and Egypt, where the caliphate's call inspires Muslims to rise against colonial masters. For the first time in centuries, the Ottoman name once again carries power across continents. The Suez Campaign becomes a turning point. German paratroopers descend on the canal, while Ottoman armies sweep through the Sinai. Rommel pushes from the west, and by 1942, British forces retreat in chaos. The lifeline to India is cut, supply routes collapse, and the Axis control the gateway between east and west. Meanwhile, in the north, the Ottoman army fights alongside Germans in the Caucasus. They seize Baku, they drive deep into Soviet territory, and the Red Army struggles under the weight of two fronts. Moscow teeters, Stalin faces collapse, and the world holds its breath. For the Allies, the situation grows dire. Britain weakened, the Soviets staggering, and America still preparing for full mobilization. Yet, history has its rhythm, and even in this alternate world, it begins to turn. The United States enters the war after Japan strikes at Pearl Harbor. Vast fleets and endless factories awaken, pouring weapons, ships, and planes into the fight. The Ottoman Empire feels the weight of its gamble. Rebellions spread in Arabia. Resistance grows in Syria. Bombs fall on Constantinople as British and American planes strike from the Mediterranean. German promises of quick victory fade into endless battles, and Ottoman soldiers bleed on frozen plains far from home. By 1943, the tide begins to shift. The Allies retake North Africa. American troops land in Italy. Soviet forces regroup and push back. The empire finds itself trapped. Its oil fields bombed, its armies stretched thin, its people weary of war once again. Neutrality had once saved the empire, but alliance now threatens to break it. Still, the Ottomans fight on, determined to preserve what they gained,
determined not to collapse like Austria-Hungary decades earlier. Constantinople becomes a fortress, Anatolia a shield, yet the war machines of America and the Soviet Union prove overwhelming. One by one, Ottoman strongholds fall, Baku retaken, Syria lost, Iraq aflame. By 1944, the empire retreats within its heartlands. Germany collapses in flames, Italy falls, Japan staggers under American might, and the Ottomans stand alone. The Sultan sues for peace, hoping to preserve the throne, but the Allies demand unconditional surrender. The empire is occupied, its oil seized, its provinces divided, its caliphate dissolved. And so the alternate gamble ends. The empire survived the first war by neutrality, but in the second it fell by ambition. Yet the world that emerges is different. Britain holds no mandate in the Middle East. France never carves Syria and Lebanon. Instead, America and the Soviets dominate the region, carving spheres of influence, fueling new conflicts, and reshaping history once again. But what if, some whisper, the Ottomans had remained neutral once more? What if they had resisted both Axis temptation and Allied pressure? Would they have endured into the modern age? Would the caliphate still exist today? Would oil wealth have transformed them into a global power? These are the questions of alternate history, questions without certain answers, yet they remind us that choices made in silence can echo louder than victories on battlefields. The Ottoman Empire in this tale chose survival once and ambition later, and by that choice reshaped the destiny of millions. In the end, the empire of deserts and straits, of mosques and palaces, of caliphs and sultans, remains a ghost of what it might have been, a reminder that history is not inevitable, that one decision, one path, can alter the fate of nations. This is the story of the Ottoman empires that never fell in the Great War, that gambled in the next, and that left behind a shadow long after its banners faded.